This is Judith Lay welcoming you to Manx Radio and to the podcast of this week's edition of At Your Service. Manx Radio! In two different ways, we're being very environmentally aware on the programme today. Simon Sutcliffe's happy place is anywhere that's outdoors. And Louise Whitelegg is in the studio wearing a different hat. And as we'll be taking a deeper look at creation, our music, weaving between the two guests, is the peaceful, prayerful Celtic invocation to the Creator.
North, east, south and west, I ask this circle to be blessed. Earth below me, sky above, create to fill this place with love. North, east, south and west, I ask this circle to be blessed. Earth below me, sky above, create to fill this place with love.
Simon Sutcliffe is a Methodist minister with a passion for the environment. He's never happier than when he's outside, whether walking in the hills or working in his garden. He's on the island this weekend and has just finished leading a 24-hour retreat called Rooted in Creation. That was at Tide of A, our retreat house in Peel, and it was there that I had a chat with him. Rev'd Simon Sutcliffe has recently been appointed as the Free Church Chaplain at Keele University. With 14,000 students plus staff on campus, I'm guessing it's a pretty busy ministry.
Absolutely, yes. I've only been in role for about a month now, so I've seen my first welcome week where all these nervous students arrive on campus, but it is a role that I'm thoroughly enjoying. No day can be the same. You have no idea who's going to turn up into your office that day and what they're going to talk about and what they're going to bring. And then other times you are busy trying to just make the whole chaplaincy just tick over and work, just silly things like who's going to order the chairs or who's going to fix the microphone stand, those kinds of things, yeah.
Now, when last we met, you were a pioneer minister, and that requires a lot of thinking on your feet. So I guess it's a really good preparation for the work that you're doing now.
It is. In fact, when I was interviewed, I played a lot on my pioneer ministry kind of background, because not only do we do things with students like that, but we also have some of the more difficult things that we have to do. So, for instance, if there's a student death, then we will take some kind of service. But most of the people there aren't going to be Christians, but they'll want to come to something. And so we will try and, just like a pioneer, try and find language that is both religious but works for other people, so that you can still have those beautiful moments for people. And one of the things that we do, I've not done it yet, but cadavers, the bodies that medical students work on, well, often we'll take services for them and their families and their students. So there's a whole mix of people there. And those things about being a pioneer minister, about being able to talk about God in ways that doesn't threaten people or doesn't put people off, those skills are highly needed in these kind of chaplaincy environments. Yeah.
And good that the university placed such value on having a chaplaincy, because all the denominations are represented and a lot of the funding is provided by the university. But it shows that they want to provide this as a necessary outreach.
Absolutely. So they fund full-time the Muslim chaplain and 50% of me, the Free Church Chaplain, the Anglican chaplain and the lay Catholic chaplain. And we sit as an institution, so everybody has a department, and we sit under student services, which is also the department that would look after mental health and well-being for students. And as part of my induction at the university, I've been meeting lots of different people, including the Vice-Chancellor. And it's clear that they really value the work of the chaplaincy team. And I think it's because when we introduce ourselves, we say we're low threshold. You don't need to be referred to us. You don't need to make a booking through the system. If you're having a really rubbish day, just turn up and tell us why your day's been rubbish. And I think what that does for the university is it takes the burden off other more stretched resources, and we get to sometimes nip in the bud quickly something that might escalate and become a bigger problem. So I think, we're really highly valued, I think, in the university.
So, Simon, When did your passion for the great outdoors begin?
I got into the outdoors when a biology teacher at my school took a sixth form group to go walking in Cumbria. And I was hooked immediately, straight away. We went up Helvellyn in Cumbria, and from then I've just loved everything about the outdoors. And I think it's only as we've become more aware about the environmental crisis that we're living in, that kind of hit something for me about, how do I live loving the outdoors and living in a world where we are causing such harm and have caused such harm to our planet. And so those two things I was wrestling with a little bit. And I read a really good book called The Last Child in the Woods, and I forgot the name of the author now, but people can look it up. It's all about how humans have become more detached from the world, from nature, from creation. And, it was only 2 or 3 generations ago where people would be still sleeping with their animals, for instance. And it made me think, actually, maybe part of the ecological crisis isn't just us pumping smoke into the air and fumes, and I say that as somebody who's, flown over in an aeroplane to get here. But the reason why we can do that without it affecting us is because we've lost connection with nature. And certainly on an island like this, our ancestors were very in tune with the sea and the soil and the seasons, whereas now we have depersonalised that relationship. So we can talk about nature as if it's over there, and us humans as if we're not nature, as if we're separate from creation. And so I've been working and reading and writing around working back with creation to see what creation can teach us. And I think that led me to this sense of, I call it earthed wisdom, but this sense that actually what if God already had put into creation all the stuff that humans and the rest of creation need to exist. And actually, if we got back in tune with creation and learnt from the earth, from creation, then we might learn something more about how to be good human beings. And that in itself might help us alleviate some of the crises that is happening on our planet at this time. One of the key problems is human centrism. So the idea that we think of ourselves as the centre. And you can understand where some of that comes from for Christians and from the 3 Abrahamic faiths, because we've got a story in Genesis that almost sounds like that human beings are the pinnacle of God's creation. But what if we're not the centre of it all? What if or other things are? So I'll give you 2 examples for this one. My gut is made up of lots of bacteria, and I can't survive without it. I need that bacteria to live. So what if you're not looking at Simon Sutcliffe, a human being? What if you're looking at Simon Sutcliffe, an incubator for his bacteria? What if the bacteria is the central part of this thing that you're looking at, and all the other stuff's not? Or another way I've thought about it is, I could say to you that I've trained my 2 dogs not to mess in the house. But the reality is that they've told me when they need to go to the loo. They've trained me. I can tell from looking at them, I better open the door and let you out into the back garden. So who's trained who? Have they trained me or have I trained them?
But where does that thinking take us then?
So if we start thinking that we're not the centre, I want to talk about not the non-human world or even nature, but the more than human world, the world that's beyond us, that's more than us. And science is beginning to prove some of this stuff, which I think our ancestors knew years ago. So we know now that trees communicate with each other through the mycelial network. The mycelial network is a kind of fungi that runs underneath all the ground, wherever we are. And you know when it's really active because that's when you see mushrooms just pop up. Basically, they're the fruit of the mycelia, which is underneath the ground. And the roots of trees attaches to these mycelia. It's called mycorrhiza. We don't know how it happens yet, but we know it happens, that trees then can send signals through this network to other trees. Some things that we've learnt so far is if a forest is being attacked by aphids from one side, it can send a message through the network so that the trees further in the forest can start to make their leaves waxier so that the aphids can't attack them, can't bite them or hang on to them. There's also some evidence that the mother trees or the ancient trees can send nutrients and resources just to their saplings and not to all the other trees that are out there. So they can target their own family in order to help them survive. And it's not all beautiful and pretty. So in the Amazon, where, there's a lot of competition for space for trees and plants, sometimes they can send toxins to other plants to try and get rid of them in order that their kind can thrive. But all of that suggests there's a kind of intelligence in our trees. A man called Merlin Sheldrake is a mycologist, so those are people who study mycelia and fungi. And they took a wood-eating fungus and they put it into some wood on a petri dish. And then as it grew, the mycelia spread out radially in all directions, looking for the next source of food. And then when they put a little piece of wood in one part of the petri dish, it stopped moving everywhere else and just moved towards this wood. Then they took out the original piece of wood, brushed off all the fungi and just left the little bit that was inside it. And they put it back in a petri dish with no other wood in it. And it only grew in the direction of the first piece of wood. So it's as if it had a memory. It already knew where that wood was. That is astonishing. and this is God's creation. And it's not astonishing to God. God knows this. So that kind of thinking then, what is it trying to teach us about life, about how to be a human being? It also means that what are the trees trying to communicate? As soon as you hear that, when you then read again the passage in the Bible that says the trees of the field shall clap their hands and the mountains shall bow down before you, what if they actually can? It just doesn't look like what we think it looks like. So other people have written around this would say we've got to think about sentience and feelings differently. And if we can think about sentience and feelings that are more than human, then that opens up a whole world of possibilities about what it means to be a human being on this planet.
This is absolutely fascinating, Simon. I don't know why I should be so staggered by what you're saying, because David Attenborough in his wonderful programmes has shown us not only the beauty of creation, but he's shown us how animals survive, how they've adapted to survive, how they've changed according to their environment. So why can't we see this as part of a bigger picture that takes in every created thing?
Absolutely. It could be rock formations. It could be any natural created thing. And by created thing, I mean created by the divine, by God. And what I find staggering is that our ancestors knew this, and our ancestors on other continents knew this and still know this. So it wasn't unusual to have a mountain that was revered, or a tree, or a river, or a bend in a river. A lot of our churches are built on bends in rivers, or were historically, because they were seen as somehow sacred. And what we managed to do, I think, and I think the church has to take some responsibility for this historically, maybe not now, but historically. What we managed to do was convince these groups that they weren't as clever as us. Us Christians were more clever. And I think there's a peeling back from that now. And actually, when we start to read our scriptures differently, thinking of the more than human world as much as our human centrism, then we can read about a different kind of God and the way in which Jesus inhabits the earth differently. So a good example of that, again, going back to that Genesis passage in chapter 1, a theologian called Cynthia Mo-Labida writes about this, and she says that every day that God creates, at the end of that day, God looks at it and God says, it is good. Mo-Labida says that the word in Hebrew, we would say in English, tov, T-O-V. She says that word, it does mean good, but it can also be used as life-giving or life-furthering. Now, if you read then those days of creation, those 6 days, and then change the word good to the word life-giving or life-furthering, it means that God created night and day, and it was life-giving, life-furthering. God created plants and creepy crawlies, and it was life-giving, life-furthering. God created human beings, and it was life-giving, life-furthering. See, it makes sense that what God created wasn't static, ever. It was always something that would be there to generate more life. And the way in which God has generated life and makes creation life-giving and life-furthering is through composting, essentially, decomposition. So things that live and then they die and then they give nutrients to the soil or the sea in order that new things can live. And I'm always shocked now that us Christians never figured out that that was God's unique pattern for the whole of life, for the whole of the world, for the whole of the created order. Because our central story is about a man who lived, died, and relived. And I think, why didn't we figure this out earlier? Why didn't we notice that this pattern is what is God's great pattern for creation?
So anybody listening to this and saying, this is fascinating, I want to think about this more, where can they go? What should they do? Next steps?
That's a really good question. There are a number of people writing about this. If you've got a scientific background or you're interested in those scientific things, then certainly somebody like Merlin Sheldrake, and he has lots of things on social media, various video channels. His stuff is fascinating. You can't help but get caught up in his stuff. If you're interested in this as a Christian, there are lots of books. Just go and look for something called either green theology or eco-theology, and there's lots of stuff around that would help. And if you're just generally interested, there's the Eco Church Awards, there is Outdoor Church. It's a book, but it's a thing that people do where their church is outdoors and they worship through just how nature presents itself. It makes you realise that the world's just much more amazing than we sometimes let ourselves believe it is.
Thank you, Reverend Simon Sutcliffe, asking us to consider what God is teaching us through and with creation. And valuing creation is at the heart of an event that's happening in Douglas next Saturday morning, although the title wouldn't necessarily suggest that. It's called Baffled by Buildings. And here to tell us all about it is Louise Whitelegg. Now, usually when Louise joins us on the programme, she's bringing us news of Christian aid because she's our local representative for the International Aid Agency. But today, she's wearing a different hat.
Another hat that I currently wear is I am the Net Zero Carbon Officer for the Anglican Church here on the Isle of Man.
Now, that's a role, as you say, for the Anglican Church, but you in fact work ecumenically because this is something that everybody's involved in, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the ecumenical part comes through CAME, Church's Life in Man, the World Development Committee, which specialises in looking at world development issues. And it's got a number of different people involved, CAFOD, Christian Aid, Fair Trade, and representatives from the different churches on the island. And obviously, one of the massive issues that's affecting everybody is climate change. So, as a committee, we sat down and thought, what is relevant to the Isle of Man at the moment? And to be honest, Baffled by Buildings was a working title. And, we just thought, we're just going to go with it. So Baffled by Buildings is an event that we've put together looking at how we, as custodians of buildings, can make them more environmentally sound for the future. How can we decrease our environmental impact when we've got these buildings that are hundreds of years old, large, creaky buildings? How can we make those more efficient? For example, looking after our stained glass, making sure that the stained glass is in good condition, that the lead's in good condition. We're going to be reducing the amount of drafts that we've got. By looking after our roofs, we're going to be stopping the amount of water ingress that there is. There is no easy solution to this, but with a bit of forethought and a bit of positive thinking about what we can do, we can make the buildings comfy and we can also make sure that they're environmentally sustainable.
And also, we can take advice. We're not expected to have the answers ourselves, are we?
This is why it's all of us working together, because we're all trying to achieve the same goal. So, Baffled by Buildings. So what we're going to do on this morning, we're going to start off by looking at what are we trying to do and why are we trying to do it. So we've got a couple of very special guests as well. we have Ruth Valerio. Now, do you remember that name?
I do. I remember Ruth coming to the island some years ago, and at the time she was talking about this project to be eco churches, and there were a series of awards and there were various things that we could do to get bronze, silver and gold awards, and the charity was called Arosha, and I remember Ruth giving a lot of helpful advice on that. But I believe that she is coming in a different capacity this time. Louise, is that right?
Yes, well, we're taking her back to her roots because she's always been an environmentalist and a theologian, and she's going to talk to us about the theology. What is the theology behind loving our environment, how we safeguard God's kingdom? And then later we've got another very special guest, and that is a gentleman called Adrian Fox. Now, Adrian is the Environmental Sustainability Officer for the Church of England, and he is that font of knowledge that we need. He has got a wealth of knowledge and experience of transforming the Church of England's churches into net zero churches. He's worked on new buildings and buildings that are 800 years old and transforming them into sustainable buildings.
So this is obviously going to be very worthwhile. So we need to know the details of when and where and how long and how much. Tell us everything, Louise.
We're starting from the basics and we're going to go right the way through to some specifics, and also looking at showcasing one of the island's projects, which is fascinating. So it's going to be on the 9th of November. We'll start for 9 for coffee. Talks and presentations start from 9:30, and we're looking to wrap up around 12:30.
And where's this being held?
We're really lucky to have St Andrew's URC in Douglas hosting us for this event.
So that's by the traffic lights, Glencrutchery Road. And the lovely thing about that is there's plenty of easy parking and easy access to the building.
And also on a bus route. There's a lot of confusion when we use words like carbon net zero. And I don't actually think those terms are really helpful. As Christians, we know we should be loving and looking after what God has given us, God's beautiful creation. And it's really how we can be better Christians, how we can love creation and safeguard it for future generations. It's also not being wasteful of finite, precious resources and being the best that we can be. So please don't be put off by the labels. If you want to know how to look after your building, come along, have a listen, ask any questions. One of the things I'm hoping to achieve at the end of this morning is to have a pledge. That each person who comes to have a pledge to whatever level they want to make it, whether it be to pledge to join Eco Church or to pledge to do an audit of the heating system or of the damp or of the drafts, a pledge to do something, just to come up with a plan of what you can change. It doesn't have to be huge. Huge would be good. It doesn't have to be big, though. But to have a think about what your next steps are. And then there'll be future events and future support based around those pledges. So once we, as a group of volunteers, have all got a feeling for what help is needed, we can help to then craft further support in the future.
If we love something, we want to care for it. And that really is what's coming through to me from what you're saying. Let's love our environment and let's show that love by the way we treat it.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Thank you, Louise Whitelegg. And Baffled by Buildings is next Saturday morning from 9 a.m. in St Andrew's United Reformed Church on Glencrutchery Road here in Douglas. And the two special guests won't actually be there in person. In order to minimise their environmental impact, they'll be taking part via a Zoom link with the UK, using the two big screens already in place in St Andrew's Church. And now it's time to take a look at this week's notice board, starting with events today, Sunday, November the 2nd. Maccled Parish Church invite you to their special All Souls service this afternoon at 2:30. All are welcome to share in this time of remembering all those we've loved and lost. It doesn't have to be a recent bereavement, and you don't have to be a regular church attender. This is a time of recollection where everyone is welcome. Gareth Moore will be giving his ever-popular November organ concert at Trinity Methodist Church here in Douglas this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Admission is free, all are welcome, and Trinity Church is at the traffic lights opposite the Rosemount pub here in Douglas. Caring for All is a new venture to support carers and those they care for. It's in Port Erin Methodist Hall on Station Road on the first Wednesday of the month from 2 until 3:30, and the first session will be this Wednesday, November the 6th. Pop in for music, activities, a cuppa and a chat with like-minded folk. Enjoy a delicious hot lunch and support a good cause. That's the invitation to Onken Methodist Church Hall from noon on Friday, November the 8th. It's a main course, dessert, tea or coffee for £10 per person. Ring or text Sue on 405 410 to book your place. 405 410, with proceeds supporting the Methodist missions. Onken Methodist Church Hall is on the main road in Onken, with bus stops in both directions right outside. And St Thomas's Church in Douglas are giving to go green. First event is the Bobcats Rock and Roll Night in St Thomas's Church on Saturday the 9th, starting at 7:30. No need to book, just come along. And finally, the Mariners Choir will be in St John's Methodist Church next Sunday night at 6:30, where Reverend Joe Smart will preach, and as usual, the service will be followed by supper and community hymn singing. Also next Sunday night, November the 10th, is the next bilingual Manx and English language service in Ballabeg Methodist Church. It's at 6:30 and will be led by Reverend Janet Corlett, and there'll be Manx and English music too. And the theme, very appropriately for the season of remembrance, is peace. And that's all we've time for now, but I'll be back later with Sundown, a warm welcome into our virtual lounge tonight from 9 o'clock onwards. Virtually everything you'll need to round off your day, but the mix of easy listening music, your requests and dedications are very real, and I'd love you to join me if you can. And so, until whenever we meet again, this is Judith saying thank you for listening, and I wish you and those you love a blessed and peaceful week and a very good morning.
The Nation Station.